thank you very much for this opportunity to speak. I'm not going to speak for long, actually. I want this to be a showcase of the research that's done within our professional doctorate, rather than our professional doctorate ourselves. As Almut said, I'm Rachel Lewis. I, along with Joe Yarker, run the professional doctorate here at Birkbeck. Joe and I are in an academic job share. We were actually the first academic job share in the University of London, and we both work part-time. So we are part-time at Birkbeck running the professional doctorate and researching in the area of wellbeing and work. And we're also directors of a consultancy called Affinity Health at Work. And I think that's really key, that we work both as practitioners and academics, and that really brings the spirit of what we are doing and what's different with the professional doctorate that we're running here. For those of you that, I don't know how many of you are occupational psychologists, but for those of you that aren't aware, the route to becoming an occupational psychologist is a pretty tough one, to be honest. You need to do an undergraduate degree in psychology, an accredited degree. You then need to do an accredited degree, accredited master's, such as the one at Birkbeck, which is called your stage 1 training, and that's in occupational psychology. And up until last year, you then only had one option for becoming a registered and chartered occupational psychologist, and that was to go through the BPS route of chartership. Once you had the BPS route of chartership, then you could become HCPC registered, the HCPC being our regulatory body. But as of last year, there's an alternative, and that alternative is through our professional doctorate. So 2 parts. The first part, which is 2 years part-time, you can, after that process, which is focused on professional practice, you can become a registered occupational psychologist, so have the title of occupational psychologist. If you then go on and do another 2 years for the research element of this, at the end of those, you would obviously have the title of doctor, you would have your doctorate, and you would also be eligible for BPS chartership. So we are the only course, the only institution to be able to offer this alternative route to becoming an occupational psychologist in the UK. Our program's been running, we're in our 3rd full year, or we will be in our third full year from January. Joe and I were running part of the doctorate at Kingston since 2016 as well. The way we run it is we do a mixture of taught sessions, of peer group learning and individual supervision. So every student on our program will have a practice supervisor, who will be somebody who is a chartered occupational psychologist. And also, if they go on to do the next stage, they will have a research supervisor who will have a PhD in an area related to occupational psychology. Then we meet up face-to-face 5 times a year, and those days are really focused on a blend of CPD, a blend of skills, a blend of peer and group supervision, everything we need in order to progress. One of the things you'll see is that, and might have noticed, is it's actually quite quick. So we'll get you from your master's to achieving your doctorate in 4 years part-time, which is much shorter than lots even of full-time PhDs. So the course is particularly designed for those that are working. So we don't have a full-time option because it's important that you are working while you're doing this doctorate. And it seems intense, it is intense, but it works. We have incredibly high completion rates on our doctorate. In fact, in the time since we've started it, we've only had 2 withdrawals on our doctorates and no non-completions. So for those of you that know completion rates on PhDs, that's massively different. And we've also had an awful lot of publications. So our professional doctorate is not the easy route for people, and it's not the less rigorous route. It is as academically good as a PhD would be. I'm not going to go into actually how it's all assessed, because I want to showcase some of the work that's done by our professional doctorate students. We've got three brilliant speakers today. We've got Dr. Anna Kane, Dr. Claire Barnes, and Dr. Donna Willis, all of whom were very experienced occupational psychologists before coming onto the programme. And they actually joined the programme at the second part. So they joined after they were chartered, and they completed their body of work in 2 years part-time. So just coming on to do the research thesis element of their work. Without further ado, I would like to hand over to Anna. So Anna, I've introduced yourself and welcome.
Lovely, thank you, Rachel. Really delighted to be here. So I'm Dr. Anna Kane. So who am I? Well, I run Zest Psychology. I'm a chartered occupational psychologist. Well, I've got a little slide about me actually. So I'm going to be presenting my research, but first, just a bit about me. So I was one of the Kingston cohort, and I developed my work around self-confidence at work. So I understood and developed a construct of self-confidence. So as it says here, I'm a chartered occupational psychologist, been doing that for a long time, and I live in Brighton. So moving on, in today's session, excuse me, am I able to control these slides?
Yeah, you control now, Anna, I think.
Okay, thanks, Rach. So today I'd like to present just a very small snapshot to you of the work that I did on the professional doctorate. So these are the two papers that I published earlier this year, actually. As many of you will know, it takes a little while for the cogs to move, but I was so delighted to have my work in the ICPR, and these are the two papers. So a systematic literature review of self-confidence and workplace coaching, and then the development of the EDDI model, which I use now in my executive coaching and go on to share it with others. Okay. Not sure how to move it on. Fine. Okay, here we go. I think this is it. Right. So just briefly, why develop confidence? So just to get us in the mood for thinking about confidence. Well, confidence motivates us. It increases our performance. Good for executive coaching is that leaders are more likely to be successful if they're confident, and then they go on to develop their teams, and they're likely to create environments where bullying is less likely to occur. So these are all great reasons. And then there's some more reasons. So I won't spend long on these, but here we can see personal benefits such as improved personal impact, some more leadership benefits, training is better, and then this idea that you take on more work at work, you spot new opportunities, new technologies, and so on. So it really creates a better workplace to be in. So in my systematic literature review, I identified some limitations of existing approaches to self-confidence. So there was no clear definition of self-confidence. So this included an overlap between the well-known constructs of self-efficacy and self-esteem. So authors and researchers frequently overlap these constructs. A lot of the measures of self-confidence were viewed as were static measures, but actually, self-confidence doesn't operate in a social vacuum, and so confidence changes and shifts. Another limitation was that the cognitive and motivational aspects prevailed. So, do I believe in my confidence and in my ability to do something? Whereas the embodiment and physiological factors were largely overlooked. So that real kind of lived embodied experience of confidence. And then very importantly for me as well, there wasn't much attention paid to diversity of participants. And so we were seeing studies primarily with Caucasian undergrad students in America, so really not representative of a wider working population. So to address these limitations, it was really important to think about the methodology. So put a lot of time and thought into the methodology and made sure that it was a robust methodology, but that it didn't just deliver something that was already existing in existing literature. So this study aligned with the overarching goals of feminist values in research. So we wanted to create spaces where people could disclose their lived realities and those different realities, and then we were able to use that evidence to address what was happening for people with their confidence. So we set about having we purposefully chose a sample of participants to make sure that it represented a wide range of participants. It could have easily ended up being a lot of 40-something women, which is one of the categories I fall into because they tend to get interested in these types of studies. Instead, we had 27 interviews with women, men, and this included transgender women and men and non-binary participants, and then a range of other identities, ethnicities, sexualities, so on. And neurodiversity was also a feature as well. We didn't measure that up front, but because we chose such a diverse pool of participants, we were hearing lots of references to neurodiversity, so we did actually measure it retrospectively. And then for the approach itself, in terms of the interviews, we decided an interview approach would be good, but we took an embodied approach. So we did a body awareness practice before interviews started, and that really put participants in a place where they could access the answers to questions about their embodied experiences. And we're very considerate towards the vulnerable participants. Bullying emerged quite a lot as a lot of the storylines, and also we're talking to people from a range of corners of the world. So we're just really thinking about who people are and what they bring and how we need to engage with them. And then this embodied approach went through to our analysis, where thematic analysis was used, but we incorporated promiscuous analysis. So this enabled me to move a little bit beyond the mainstream thematic analysis, and it really allowed a lot of themes to emerge. And my belief is that the whole of this approach, it created a really strong model, and in my use of it, lots of different people resonate with it or find it resonates with them really strongly, and I've never heard people kind of go, oh yeah, that suits someone else, but it doesn't suit me. So all of these details in our methodology helped create this model. So I'm going to move on to the model. So there's basically 3 components to self-confidence: connectedness, competence, and authenticity. There's more detail about what makes up these components, the sub-factors, in the papers. I don't have time, unfortunately, for them today. But once these models are in place, so the components are in place, then we can see what happens. So if they're not in place, then we get a downward spiral, people losing confidence and going through this downward spiral. And you can see here mindset is a feature which hasn't featured elsewhere. So people can get stuck in this downward spiral, or they can shift back out if they put some of their components back in place. So the upward spiral, why are my slides moving? There we go. This is the upward spiral. If you've got all of your components in place and they're interacting, then you're experiencing an upward spiral of confidence. And here we see a different type of mindset. You can have a depreciating mindset whilst you're in an upward spiral, but you're more likely to come out of it. So an enhancing mindset helps maintain it. You self-manage until your performance is complete. But something can happen. You can fail to self-manage, or one of the components can get taken away, and you can dive down. So this is the model in its entirety. It's missing some of the detail, but it gives you a real sense of how confidence is dynamic. It goes up, it goes down, and it can move around. It's social. We can see that connectedness is an important part, and it brings authentic confidence. So just a very quick minute on what I've been doing in my work since. So I've developed authentic confidence products, so coaching and training primarily, which are online and face-to-face, social distancing permitting. Obviously, it's constantly changing. And this is for people, this is for individuals, groups or cohorts, and teams. So it's very interesting. It seems to kind of go one of two ways. You might be working with people who are looking to develop their confidence, to say go for a promotion or achieve something that feels kind of hard for them to reach. And I like this slide because it kind of demonstrates that. And also one of the stories in the research was about a non-binary individual who was assigned male at birth. And one of the things, he found the authenticity to wear a skirt and tights. And then that gave him confidence at work to do stuff, presentations and things that he wouldn't normally do. So I love this slide because it kind of captures the fluidity of the whole thing, not just the model, but the people and, you know, who's in it and what it means. And then the sadder side to the story is the bullying that often brings people's confidence down. And even the most super confident people, if they experience prolonged bullying, will lose confidence. And so I work in a space where you provide a safe space for people to work through these issues and recover and restore their confidence. So that, in a very short moment, is my research, which I'm delighted to share with you. And if you want to stay in touch and hear more about what I do, or just ask any questions, or whatever your purpose, then here are my contact details. So thank you very much for listening. I think that's probably my time done.
Thank you so much, Anna. I think that Anna's is a great representation of the one of the real differences in professional doctorate research, and it's relevant to practice. Anna's shown just how clearly she's been able to use her model and continues to use her model in her practice. What she didn't say is she's also had 2 peer-reviewed publications from her research as well. So a brilliant example of that, being able to be a great practitioner and a great academic. That's what we're going for. We're going to, I'm sure, I can't see questions, but I'm sure there's lots of questions which we will have time for at the end. But I want now to go straight on and introduce another fabulous woman who has completed our professional doctorate, and that's Dr. Claire Barnes. Hello, Claire.
I started my presentation with "you're on mute." That might be a sign of the times, I think. So now for something completely different. I have been in the workplace a long time, and one of the things that when I started doing the professional doctorate that I was really interested in was how come women are far more participative in the workplace, but still struggle to reach the upper echelons of many organisations. And so I was very interested in looking at the factors that influence the appointment of women to public company boards in the UK, really as a keystone, as a touchstone, as an indication as to where we are with that in the world of work. There's been a lot of monitoring in this area. The female FTSE board report showed, just as I embarked on this research, that the number of women on FTSE boards was increasing, but the real key drivers in a business are the executive directors, and that is still a very low percentage. And although it is increasing relatively at snail's pace. I did a systematic review as part of the doctorate, as everyone does, and I looked at the research about the selection of women into these positions. There's a lot of archival research about board trends, but there's almost nothing on selection processes. These tend to be processes that at a very senior level are shrouded somewhat in mystery. So I was very, very interested in looking at the processes. It was very, very difficult I talked to lots of headhunters, and with the idea of actually looking at the selection process itself, but it proved to be far too sensitive a subject for anybody to really let me in. And so I decided that it would be really interesting to talk to some of the people who gatekeep the board positions, and that's the chairs and CEOs of FTSE companies. And so I set out to contact some of them and to interview them about the barriers to women gaining positions on these boards and being on these boards. And so I was able to do 12 semi-structured interviews with currently or recently retired chairs and CEOs from the FTSE 350, although most of them were from the FTSE 100. So quite a lot of people you would know about, and I went to some lengths to protect their identities. I interviewed 9 men and 3 women, all of a certain level of maturity. And then I transcribed the interviews and analysed them using thematic analysis, and identified 4 main areas. Diversity itself, looking at the definitions of diversity and the attitudes to diversity, and then I looked at the barriers, the facilitating factors, and the conditions that might be required to drive change. Diversity, I found, is a very well accepted idea. People were very happy to talk about diversity, but it was, in board terms, it was experienced as something that was really quite effortful. And appointing a woman was seen as really quite inherently risky by some participants. They found it very difficult to judge women's experience, and even actually to sort of to see them as equal participants at a board level. The sort of barriers that I found, people were very, perhaps it was very easy for them to be very to be very, very negative about executive search companies, to some extent to blame what they saw as their difficulties and their effort in making boards diverse. It was very easy to blame executive search companies, but they had very little that was good to say about them. And they are definitely because they are reluctant to widen the pool, because that's very effortful and takes a lot of engagement, they're definitely a barrier to increasing diversity at this level. Interestingly, many complained about the shortage of female candidates, while at the same time being curiously very aware of the fact that in the middle ranks of their organisations they had some very talented women, and it was almost as if there was a sort of disconnect between the two. They didn't really own the responsibility for developing the pipeline. And, you know, I find that really quite curious, but it's because, of course, that again is very effortful, and it's not something that it's not the easiest thing for people to engage in. There was a lot of bias and stereotyping, very evident, and people owned it, but again, weren't really sure what to do about it, or even sort of felt that it was right at the front of their minds and perhaps their responsibility to do anything about it. They really talked about selection in terms of fit and in terms of personal judgment. And when they talked about female appointments, they described the women very much in exceptional terms. So a firecracker, an exceptional woman, an astonishingly capable lady, were the sort of terminology they used about the female candidates that they'd actually supported, they promoted, selected. However, external pressure is not surprise, something they talked about a lot in terms of being a kind of level of scrutiny that would drive them to increase and make more representative and diverse their boards. And they are very aware of adverse publicity. Most of the chairs saw their role as putting pressure on executive search companies. In terms of conditions for change, having a leader who is really, really committed really committed to driving change is absolutely essential for doing this at every level in an organisation. People who were really committed to it could see that normalising caring at every level of an organisation, particularly at board level, so accepting responsibility for elderly parents, for showing that caring is something that everybody can engage in, could be a huge facilitator for change. People who are really engaged in the change agenda understood that developing a pipeline and a promotion strategy for the female executives in their business was something that they needed to do, and that in order to really create change, you need to drive the agenda through every policy, through every aspect of an organisation to really make it happen. But of course, that is very effortful, and it means a change in the status quo. So people, find that and engage in it, find it, quite a difficult thing to engage in. So overall, the efforts to increase the number of women on boards in executive positions is really quite static. It's quite interesting that the FTSE 100 is showing a marginal increase, but the FTSE 350, so when you get into smaller organisations, actually the level of diverse representation is actually even smaller and even slower than you might expect, which I personally find quite shocking. Bias and stereotyping remains very evident. Selection and assessment is really insufficiently robust at board level. Experience is seen as a proxy for merit and as a proxy for suitability. And, there is a sort of general feeling of frustration that maybe there isn't a pool of oven-ready candidates out there who resemble men in every way. And you can see that this creates a really big barrier. Executive search companies, I've said, are definitely a barrier as far as change is concerned. But there is a lack of responsibility, there's a lack of a push factor, there's a lack of a drive amongst the very senior people that I interviewed to really feel that change is absolutely necessary in this. So there's no doubt that practitioners, executive search companies and businesses themselves can make a huge difference in terms of the way we assess merit and in the psychometrics that we use and in helping to make the process more robust. We have talked quite a lot in the diversity research group recently about unconscious bias, and lots of companies use unconscious bias, but as we know, it doesn't really work very well. And one of the things that practitioners and researchers we could all do is help to contribute to look at breaking down bias and stereotyping in much more effective ways than we currently have in unconscious bias training. Public company chairs themselves have the ability and the power to seize and control this agenda and to make boards much more diverse, but in order to do so, they have to seize it and drive it across all levels of an organisation. And policymakers need to keep the spotlight on this, because I feel that unless there is a spotlight on it and there are the push factors to get people to do it, we will just not see levels of diversity on our boards and levels of representation in senior echelons in our organisations change very much unless there is scrutiny there and organisations feel they have to really make the effort and engage with the issues at a very high level. So thanks for listening. As I say, it's a very different piece of research from Anna's. But it's something that I think we need to keep wanging on about until we create some change. So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Claire. Such important research, and also such an insight from getting that access to the Golden Tower that would be so difficult for so many to get access to. I think the other thing that is important to say from the theme that we see throughout people that finish our professional doctorates is that is that going through this process changes them in terms of their view of research and the research journey. Claire has remained active in research, contributing to lots of different publications and also being an active member of our research group in diversity at Birkbeck. So thank you very much, Claire. Now on to our last speaker, Dr Donna Willis. Donna, over to you.
Thank you, Rach, and thank you to Claire and Anna, my peer group who have gone before me. So this is about showcasing my research, indebted to Rachel Joe for their inspiration, challenge and support, but also just to shout out a few other people that I can see on my screen. Kevin, Gail, Almouth, Nancy, all have shaped my work as an occupational psychologist over several years. So I too am a woman of a certain level of maturity, and just counting up the years that I've worked for the NHS, it equals 25, or certainly in or around the NHS. Primarily before I trained as an occupational psychologist at Goldsmiths in 2007 in leadership development, but I remain one of the few OCPSYCs who actually work for and in the NHS. And every time I say that, I always think about we must get us all together, because our clinical and counselling psychologists are really prevalent and very dominant in the conversations that we're having about well-being, particularly post-pandemic. So my research was about second victim phenomenon, and this slide perhaps sums it up beautifully. And this was outside the High Court on the day that Dr. Bauer-Garber, and if you don't know about Dr. Bauer-Garber, do look this amazing doctor up. Sadly, as a result of a day in her life where she'd just come back from maternity leave, was covering at least 5 floors at Leicester Royal Infirmary. A young lad, 7-year-old lad called Jack Adcock, died. So he was our first victim, as well as his family. But Dr. Bauer-Garber suffered greatly psychologically, but also in terms of the litigation that then followed her. And of course, the third victim is also the NHS organisation that often has to defend its position publicly. The next slide shows the approach that I took. So I was one of the first cohort, 2016 to 2017. It feels a long time ago now, that was holding my burning issue for some years. My family were being raised, and I'd certainly got to the point in 2016-17 where I felt this is my time. And I think that's really significant for those that are asking questions in the chat about, you know, how much time does this take? My first suggestion is find your burning issue. My burning issue was that doctors, specifically doctors, when something happens to them in the clinical setting, i.e. an adverse event, an untoward event, a near miss, creates psychological distress for them, and often they don't find a place for that to go. So the first step was my systematic literature review, and that was published in BMJ Leader. So that's a publication for the Faculty for Management and Leadership, Medical Leadership. And we were delighted to see that published in 2019. And then I went on to my study. So no published qualitative research had explored the doctor's lived experience of becoming a second victim. So I embarked, it's fine to go next, Rachel, actually, thank you. I embarked on an interpretive phenomenological analysis. I should be able to say that by now, shouldn't I? I still get my tongue twisted around it. With 8 doctors, an opportunistic sample, 2 of whom were female, 6 of whom were male. At the time of the incident that they spoke about, 3 were consultants, 3 specialist trainees and 2 junior doctors, and they had a range of specialties. Whoever says that qualitative research is an easy option compared to quantitative research, yes, I don't agree. 8 hours of interviews, 102 pages of typed up analysis, 55,000 words, 3,700 lines. The only way that I could make sense of it was not only with Excel, but also these are some of the sort of transcript quotes that come from my research. And I bought myself a board and stuck it on the wall of our spare room. And this is how I developed my 3 themes. In terms of the interviews, well, the doctors spoke and I listened, and it deduced into 3 themes. And they do say of IPA, and of course its home is also at Birkbeck, the plan for IPA interviews is an attempt to come at a research question sideways, and that always resonated to me. So the sideways approach brought out these 3 themes, and I'll just, that's fine, the next one's great. The first theme was actually carrying the burden, and I named it carrying it. And I remember my Viva examiner said, well, I think we should be thinking about renaming not it, but the burden. The first quote here, there's a handful of patients. If you've ever read Henry Marsh's book, he starts with a similar quote to this doctor, who wept when I spoke to him. It was very meaningful work, this, and I had a privilege of just sitting with people's emotions, often unspent, often never spoken about to people other than me. And what you can also see by that second quote is the extent of psychological morbidity, which again was given to us in terms of Kevin and Gail's work around the extent of psychological morbidity that is in the system. The next theme was contagion. And it's funny because this is pre-pandemic word, but it was as if you were going to catch something from the doctor who had erred. And this first quote on the left here was an amazing woman who had a physical disability but had worked brilliantly in her field. And all of a sudden she found that after her mistake had happened, and that did result in the death of a patient, it was as if the disability was the problem. But in actual fact, what the coroner's court found was it wasn't her fault. And that was prevalent in many of the stories that I heard. But also the extent of incivility and psychological violence. So top quote here, they're going to get you for this. I mean, that's school playground talk, but it happens in the workplace too. And it happens amongst educated, well-established human beings that give care and compassion. The third and final theme was around coping, and I was intrigued in this. A lot of work has been done in America on second victim, and coping strategies are pretty prevalent in the research that has been published overseas. But it really interested me. So someone who can no longer use their hands and is on garden leave for over a year, what do? Well, this particular doctor picked up all of his wife's unfinished knitting projects, and gosh, you could find a few in my cupboards as well, actually. But that got him through the loss of actually losing the skills that had to be sort of, if you like, shelved whilst he was on full paid garden leave whilst the case was examined. Clearly the family are a great level of support, and I think that's really interesting, thinking of what Hallie was talking about at the beginning of this, is the workaholic, of course, does, or somebody with work addiction does in some ways distance their family, and I think doctors might be quite, there might be a prevalence amongst doctors too to be workaholics, but often people just didn't talk. So here are some of the findings. I wrote about my concern about the reported extent of psychological morbidity. We know that that's prevalent amongst females and females of a certain age. There seems to be a double fallout, that when you become unwell because of the psychological distress after making the mistake, but you also lose this invincible self-image which doctors have, you lose on 2 accounts. But the levels of incivility and violence in our workplaces, and particularly in the NHS, are of grave concern. Go to the next one. So, key recommendations. There's a wonderful doctor called Joe Shapiro, who works at the Brigham and Women's out in the States, and I've been so fortunate very recently to do some work with her. Her paper was on peer support and buddy schemes. Doctors want a peer with an ear, which means that they want to speak to somebody who is also a doctor about the adverse event. And on the back of this, we're actually setting up a peer support system program in East London NHS Foundation Trust, which is where I work. Medical leaders need to find the opportunities to actually talk about mistakes and talk about psychological distress, and particularly psychological morbidity. And I think leadership has a real role to play there. If leaders talk about it, others follow. I think also, and this final point has been, perhaps I've given greater thinking to this since the pandemic, work intensity and excessive demand on people equals mistakes. And we're all human, and human beings fail. And certainly these two factors don't help us in the least. We go to the next one. So I think that we have a role as occupational psychologists here. I think well-being is our work. And I think we can make, and we continue to make, a really important contribution in this field and shine a spotlight on it. It's an imperative, not a nice to do. And this was a quote from one of the doctors who I spoke to, that it's fine to talk about the facts, but actually sometimes we need someone to talk about how I was feeling. That's been a real profound privilege for me, to be that person who talked about how people were feeling. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Donna. It was such a joy to listen to you all. Donna's currently preparing her second paper, which is about the second study, and I think here I want to talk about the theme of relevance. I think all three studies you've seen are so relevant for and important for practice, and Donna specifically is looking at these findings in the context of an incredibly strained NHS service in the wake and in the midst of the pandemic, and the likelihood that medical error will probably happen more often in these circumstances, given how pressed time-wise and how pressed emotionally everyone already is. So with that, I will stop sharing and would love to have any questions that you have. Let me see if there's any hands up. Happy to answer any questions to any of the speakers, and I will also have a look through the questions and see if there's any there. Sorry, I haven't been able to see the questions when we've been presenting. I love that idea of the peer with the ear. Thank you, Zena. I think that's a really good way to summarise lots of this research actually, and how professional doctorate research is different really. Zena says, realistically, how many hours a week should we have available if we're even thinking of doing a professional doctorate? What do you think, Claire, Anna and Donna?
It's a tough one to answer now. Gosh. Have either of you two got a recollection? I had a lot going on in my life when I was doing my doctorate, and probably work was at the bottom of the pile in some ways. But I'd say it peaks and troughs. So at some weeks you'd be spending, or at least I would be, like, I feel like it was full time on top of everything else. And then other weeks maybe it would disappear down to just maybe a handful of hours a week. So it's probably, for me, it was more about being able to handle the demand, the control of the flow, than necessarily a regular 20 hours a week or something.
I totally agree with that. I think it definitely, when you're in full research mode, it helps to be able, it does help if you're self-employed, to be honest. It helps, but you certainly need to be flexible, because there are times when you will just sit with your ideas and think and let them marinate for a few weeks, and then there'll be another time when you'll be diving deep into the literature. That's why it's so important. I think it really shines through with the three of us that the topics were things that we really, really cared about.
I think that was something that it never bothered me to pick up a paper about this subject, and yes, there were family barbecues that I didn't go to, and occasions that I didn't go to either, probably wasn't fully present with, but this was just a short time in my life, and I just feel so honoured that I had the time to do it. So it has to be your burning issue, which is what I think I said. And I noticed that Lilith's here. I hope I mentioned you, Lilith, as well. My thanks to you.
Thank you so much, all. You can see by the comments how many people really, really love that. Just to finish, we've got a question from Kevin. Kevin, do you want to just say it out loud?
Thank you, Rachel. Hi, everyone. I've got questions for everyone, but I'm just going to keep it simple and have the question I put in the chat was for Donna, because you mentioned peer with an ear, and doctors to an extent already have supervision. And we also know that among doctors, stigma is a big issue. So how willing how accessible would this be for a doctor to share, but also potentially to be the ear in which they're listening?
I think it's training, Kevin. So I think this is why we're looking at the peer support programme in our own trust. So I work for a mental health and community health trust. And as one of my psychiatrist colleagues said to me recently, yes, I can spot psychosis, but I might not be able to spot that my mate's having a bad day. So I think you have to be quite deliberate about it. In terms of supervision, I think it's really interesting. I've just seen another thing in the chat from somebody who said she was an ITU nurse, Linda, I think it was. I hope I've got that right. So nurses don't have supervision. Midwives do. Doctors, they have balance groups and may have some peer groups in psychiatry, but there's not a formal structure around that. And I think that's where we're going wrong, because there is a stigma about accessing help, professional therapy help. It's seen as remedial. Often, and one of the reasons I didn't say that I came to this work was through coaching. Doctors would bring issues to coaching. And we know as coaching psychologists, there is a line to which it crosses over to clinical. We have to be very careful of that line.
Thank you, Donna, for that.
Thank you so much. I'm conscious of time, and I'm conscious there are a few more questions, such as references for these pieces of work and questions about the doctorate itself. What I would probably suggest is to anybody that wants to follow up with references or any more questions about the doctorate, just write to me and I will answer any questions. So we've got a professional doctorate email address that I'm just typing into the chat, and that will come straight to Jo or I. So yeah, do follow up. Thank you very much. 5 minutes over, Almut, and over to you. Thanks, everyone.
Perfect timing. Thank you so much. And honestly, really a big heartfelt thank you from us to all of our speakers and presenters today. Wow, what an afternoon, right? That was deep, as my daughters would say. I think there has been a resounding theme really of having to acknowledge loss in organizations, because, Simon has spoken about Greta and really how she wants to make the world listen up, that if we don't do something, then we will lose the world as it is. Susan spoke to the losses in all of our lives, whether it was losing loved ones, losing our health during the pandemic, whether it was very temporary or more enduring, but also the loss of human contact. We have also learned from Halle that we have lost some opportunities, right? We all talk about workaholism all the time. And actually, Halle's data is showing us very clearly we don't understand it enough because there isn't enough research on it. We've also learned from Claire what a loss it is to organizations when we've got too many Steves at the top and not enough Claires. And boy, do we need to do something about it, but we talk about it all the time and not enough change is happening. So maybe we need more teenagers to make that change happen. We have learned from Donna really how profoundly people who are doing frontline care are affected by the experiences, and actually are we giving them enough in terms of a support structure, and if it's there, will they actually access it? But also we have heard stories of hope. We've heard from Anna that actually you can tackle some of these issues. And one of the things that we really do need to build up in people is their self-confidence. But the interventions, of course, have to be underpinned by evidence and by data so that we make sure that they're really supporting people in the best possible way. So thank you all so much for these wonderful and powerful messages. We have recorded today's session. There have also been lots and lots of asks for a resource pack. So what we will do is we bundle up the slides from those who are happy to share them, and also make sure that we pop in the direct links to any of the papers which people want to follow up on. And, you've heard the call, we need more evidence. So come and study with us. Come and study for a professional doctorate, come and study for a PhD, and hope to see you all in the Alec Roger Memorial Lecture at 5. So thank you all so much, and bye for now.